Hi, Burton. How are you?
I'm well, Sapna. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for asking. And thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to meet with me today. I really appreciate it. And obviously, the reason I chose you is because your profound traumatic life event that has fostered so many different aspects of our human life experience, going from love to trauma to triumph to resilience to all these. And then now, being able to give back. I mean, literally, I'm learning so much from you just by reading your amazing book called The Gift. And I mean, I just can't wait to unpack this today. I really look forward to hearing more about your story. And please feel free to, bring up whatever you would like and keep what I understand. This is a very tragic incident. So please feel free to bring up whatever you feel most comfortable with. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Sapna. And it's a pleasure for me too, because you mentioned, the fact that this indeed was a human experience, which is a big word for me. And I'll explain more why, but that's why I'm honored that the California Institute for Human Science, human, it underscores the fact that we are human. And in our tragedy, when tragedy strikes, the last thing we need is blame and shame. And it took me a long time in my recovery. Initially, I thought that my tragic experience cut me off from the world. And after a time, I recognized, sadly, that it actually connected me to the world because there is tremendous trauma in our world. And, I was in a very difficult place. I'll explain as we go what this trauma was about. But first, just to say that sitting down and writing, I did most of my writing during COVID, and I wrote at a round table overlooking a Zen garden, The Gift, Trauma to Triumph. And I wrote it for me. I wrote it because I needed to heal. And it's noteworthy too, Sapna, sadly, that when I was writing the story, I did not know where it would end. I didn't know if I would have the strength to be resilient and the courage to move forward. So that's a big statement. So let me share what happened. I was in a 11-year marriage, and the woman I married had two adult children who were mentally ill and chemically addicted.
Are you going to go into the traumatic event now? Would you like to talk about Barbara a little bit and
Talk about Barbara a little bit.
the first year fairy tale? So, according to your book, started out on a positive note. First year fairy tale. You like to?
Yes, we met when I was a financial consultant at Merrill Lynch. She was very much connected to an important family in Manhattan, and she was sweet. I was attracted. She was witty. She was humorous. So it was a special relationship, and we decided to marry, which was unusual because I think it was 10 years previously she had been divorced from her first husband, and no one in her family ever thought that she really would marry again.
Oh, wow.
But she did, and we did, and there were a lot of impediments that got in the way, but the love was there. Personally, she developed a neuropathy, which was a something that started with the birth of her second child and reignited around the time that we got married, and that made her very limited with her physical activities. So we spent a lot of time at home together. As I said, she was witty and had a wonderful personality and was kind, but she did have, it's interesting. One of the reviews I got on the book said that I was bragging about her wealth, and that was really silly because I wasn't bragging about it. To speak about her and her family, prominent family with a father who had the distinction in the 1960s, I think it was, of being the most successful financial consultant in Merrill Lynch history. He was a rags to riches story and very humble, and Barbara had good values, but she did grow up in a family where her parents never said no, except I think there was one time, one dress that was out of reach in her mother's opinion, and it must have been a doozy because they never said no to anything else. As I describe in the book, unfortunately, there were limitations. Although the money was there were limitations in the love department. Her father suffered from alcoholism, but he was a highly functioning alcoholic. And she had met her husband at Georgetown University, and they had these two sons. And I know there were difficulties early on. on. And when I came on the scene, they were in their late 30s, so they were well grown. And they had been in and out of drug treatment centers with mental illness as a dual diagnosis. Each of them, one of them, Jonathan, spent around a year at Silver Hill Hospital in New Canaan, a highly respected institution, came home and started using drugs again the next day. And Kenny was in his own apartment. When we first got married, they were both in Connecticut, so we had some privacy, but they both moved back to Manhattan. So Jonathan lived with us and continued with his addictions, and the family dynamic was difficult. I discuss, the whole issue of enabling and dysfunctional families. I know one of the questions that comes up is, what do I see as predecessors to what I experienced? What made me choose this relationship? I can go back to my early childhood where I guess I was a bit of I did some fawning, people pleasing. I thought I needed to be a medical doctor to be well respected. I studied psychology instead, but I was always attracted to helping and caring, and it became caretaking as opposed to caring. And that's where it gets to be too much. Anyway, we were together for 11 years, and I was meeting with some friends who I hadn't seen for 45 years, and we were taking a walk in Central Park. And when I came back to the apartment, I was kept from entering it by a detective who asked my name. I told him who I was, and he said, "You can't go up to your apartment because your stepson Jonathan has just murdered your wife." So it took my breath away and everything else along with it. I lost a tremendous amount emotionally. I was derailed from my career. I couldn't work for many, many years. As I said, during COVID, I finally started to write about my experience, and I found that it was helping me heal, because one of the things I did was I put together the pieces of, how could this terrible thing have happened? And I started to make sense of the senseless by connecting the dots of all these things that had happened. So,
would you be able to go into that a little bit? I would love to hear more. I mean, in my world, this type of tragedy is rare.
well, thank goodness in everyone's world it's rare, but it
Sorry.
does. No, that's okay. It does happen. I never knew the word matricide. That's the word, by the way. When a child kills his mother, that's matricide. And then there's
Okay.
patricide, for when a
For
child
the
kills his
father.
father.
So that's a real word.
You wanted to know more about what part of it?
So now we are, you've told me a little bit about yourself, a little bit about Barbara, how you're connected, and now the matricide. We're getting into the matricide. We're at the climax. If you'd like to talk about that actual moment, feel free. But if not, I can understand.
In the book, I described the screaming at the top of my lungs. I called my father, and he said, "What? What? What are you
Yeah.
talking? I can't understand what you're saying," because I was screaming. And finally, I was able to, manage to get the words out. And of course, they came from Florida to be with me. I wasn't permitted back in the apartment for a week while they cleaned it out, and it was quite gruesome. But, in my book, I talk about the importance of preparedness. I was not prepared. And, okay, so no one is prepared for this particular trauma. But from what I've learned now and how I've moved forward on my own journey, there is a level of preparedness that we can experience that I was not prepared with and armed with in terms of tools in my toolbox.
You weren't yet aware of until you went down this lane.
Yeah, in fact, Barbara and I had been seeing her therapist for many years, mostly discussing problems with her kids. And she, along the way, had recommended me to my own therapist. And when Barbara died, I had two therapists. I dropped her original therapist, and I shortly thereafter found a second one. And I said to my therapist, "I don't have PTSD," which, I look back now and I'm just, I was really in the thick of it and not able to have my feet on the ground. It was very dizzying. I turned to substances to help me numb, which very often people who are traumatized like this and who have post-traumatic stress disorder do that, even though now I recognize it. It made my journey more difficult. But just to fast forward for a minute, and then we can back up. In September 18th of 2018, I made a choice. And I said, I never made the decision to stop drinking and drugs drugging. I just made the decision to start finding happiness inside of me. And that was a point where I had already begun to heal enough to recognize that there was life after tragedy. I became familiar with the term post-traumatic growth,
Yeah.
PTG. And for those who are fortunate enough to survive very difficult circumstances, I feel that the universe gives us that a gift. And the gift is an awareness, a lesson that shakes us up. And why do we need to be shooken? Because when we are born, we are seeking the unconditional love of our parents. And parents can't give it because they didn't get it, right? And so we start this journey as a chameleon to twist ourselves to become like the parent, hoping that that will get us the unconditional love. And then we go through life into adulthood. And with all of our relationships, we may continue twisting ourselves. But then comes trauma, and it just splits our world apart. Everything that we thought we knew, we discover we didn't. And, when you get to a dark place, Sapna, of feeling that perhaps I will not survive this, at least for me, I decide, you know what? Let me be very generous with myself, with my time, because I have nothing to accomplish. I don't know if I'll be here tomorrow. Let me spend time on me and spend time awakening and getting to know my authentic self. And through that discovery of self-love that turned into, not only writing a book for my own personal healing, but deciding that I wanted to share it for the
Yeah.
benefit of others. Kindness is a beautiful, I call it a miracle drug. When we're at a point where we can be kind to others, that's a real source of happiness. And part of my journey, I created a series of t-shirts themed with symbols to help people to bust trauma.
Oh, wow, that's beautiful.
We're
Wow.
promoting those on my website at trauma2triumph.club/wearables,
Yeah.
because I feel that it's very important that people drop the shame and the blame and bust trauma so that it doesn't get the best of them, that we take from it what we can so that we can make the best of it. On my journey, I start the book, if I could read for a moment.
Yeah, please.
I traveled a frightening and lonely road through the darkness of tragedy to the light that brightened my path. Along the way, I discovered unexpected gifts, spiritual awakenings, and revelations that brought me to a new place, a rich and peaceful space within me that's grounded in love and forgiveness, faith and hope, gratitude and awe, a home in which I can continue to grow and thrive in heretofore unimaginable ways. The book is in 4 parts. Part 1 is trauma and tragedy, and then it moves on to what I call spiritual awakenings, like discovering the power of gratitude and self-forgiveness, both of which, by the way, are very difficult to do in the wake of tragedy, right? When I discovered the power of gratitude, I said to myself, how can I be grateful for what I've just encountered?
That is a beautiful way to look at it. As you were saying, Burton, you were mentioning about the main sections of the book. If you'd like to kind of continue speaking about now how we've kind of started overcoming through the growth aspect of after we live experiencing a trauma.
Sure. When I decided to share this with the public, I decided that this would not be a book about poor me. It's been called by a reviewer the Trauma Survivor's Bible because, I've integrated not only my master's in psychology background from when I was in graduate school at NYU, but 100 or more books on trauma and personal development that I've read since this tragedy. I was motivated, as we'll talk about, to develop myself more professionally so I can help more people in this area to avoid some of the pitfalls. Part 2 was spiritual awakenings, and we were talking briefly about gratitude and self-forgiveness and how in the wake of tragedy, how it's very difficult to really come to those feelings. And yet I knew I needed to do that.
How did
So
you
there
know you
was
needed to do that?
I was talking about what trauma does to us. it breaks us apart, right? I mean, it threw me completely off my horse, right? I was riding along in the journey of life, and boom, I
Weren't
came
prepared.
crashing down, tremendous amount of guilt and shame and blame, and just tremendous grief, complex grief, complicated with anger. Part of the people I had to forgive was Barbara herself, who her enabling actually wound up causing her own death. That's a message that I need to share with my readers, to understand the consequences of enabling in dysfunctional families and not creating the proper boundaries. We certainly tried, but we failed, and we had the guidance of many professionals. I could show you the letter I sent to Jonathan's psychopharmacologist the night before he did this act, saying that he needed to be medicated with more medicine for rage control. And the response I received is, he hasn't had enough rage outbursts. Let me know when he has more. And of course, that's what happened. So sometimes the mental health system fails, the legal system fails. I went through some trials and tribulations, which are minor compared to Barbara's death, but were certainly painful and caused a re-triggering trauma to go on for so many years. The legal system fails. One of these great books that I came across was by a psychiatrist called Guilty by Reason of Insanity. Not guilty, but guilty. Anyway, because Jonathan is not in prison, he's in a psychiatric facility. But fast forwarding beyond a lot of injustice, a lot of failures of our own family system and the support systems that depended upon, with unlimited resources in a practical sense, to do so. $250,000 to a mental health facility for 1 year, and he comes home and is using drugs again. So it's not a simple solution, but somehow I was led to trying to discover myself. I needed something else. If I was just dwelling on the past, couldn't have survived. So the best person, and it's interesting, I just wrote this to a patient today, the best person to rescue us from ourselves is ourselves. While it's often painful and challenging, discovering our authentic selves and internal power leads us to healthy attachment. Once we learn how to love ourselves, we've connected to a person who will never leave us. The path to recovery is a double-edged sword. First, we need to feel in order to heal. When you're ready, yourself awaits you. That's when creating a life worth living becomes possible. After these spiritual awakenings, and I use spiritual because when I went to Hoffman Institute for 10 days, and it's a world-renowned program, and they talked about 4 aspects of self: the body, the physical, the intellectual, mental, the emotional child, and the spiritual. And I was like, spiritual? I don't know what, I wasn't connecting at that time, but I deeply connect now. And by the way, when we open our eyes to the miracles that the universe provides us, we see many of them. And I'm going to mention one at 6:29. When did we start? Shortly there before, right?
Yes.
At 6:29, when I was on the sentence about screaming to my father over the phone, a friend who I hadn't seen for 40 years in high school, I reconnected with on that day, 2 friends.
Oh,
And one of them was texting. The phone call you heard that interrupted our session, that was Alex. At the moment that I was describing to you that situation where he was by my side when I
wow.
made that phone call, it gives you reason for confidence and hope. And hope, Sapna, hope is something that we desperately need. And the other thing we need is choice. I went on to further healing, and through that process, I started to feel, when Barbara died, I had said to my therapist, I could never work with anyone who has a problem with drugs. And that statement was true for 7 years. And I was sitting on the couch one day, and I got an email, and you know how there are so many fake emails asking for private information.
Yes.
And someone writes to me that they're part of a training training program for CASAC, Credentialed Alcohol and Substance Abuse Counselor.
In the New York City region.
Yes, and they wanted to offer me a grant
Oh wow.
to study this so that I could become a CASAC out of the blue, sitting there, right? I filled out the application with trepidation because I didn't know they were asking a lot of personal things, right? But I filled it out and I became a CASAC and I moved forward to become an advanced CASAC. If I was asked what one word differentiates those who have the opportunity to heal from those who don't, that word is choice. When you feel you no longer have a choice against the addiction, that's when you lose the battle. Because if you think you can't, you're right. But if you think you can, like that little engine that could, you can.
Yes.
And you can go from impossible to I'm possible, a favorite phrase of mine. I became a counselor, and in my part three was spiritual revelations, where I talk about certain coincidences and furthering my journey. And then part four is growing and thriving. Two words which were so far away from me when I started this journey of not knowing literally whether I really could ever figure out how to survive, and getting to the point of seeing how the trauma recovery process parallels the process of substance abuse recovery, and the importance of the holistic tools and practices, the breathing, the meditation, the yoga. We do trauma-informed yoga. And again, these are all things that I did, and a lot of it with unawareness initially. Like, just like when I said, gee, I don't have PTSD, I wound up doing yoga, and coincidentally, and I don't think that there is any coincidence in the universe, but coincidentally, I had been exposed to a masseuse, a therapist, massage therapist before Barbara passed, and I saw Monica every week for massage for quite a long time afterwards. While I was doing that, it never dawned on me that what I was doing was somatic movement and moving energy in my body and moving trauma out of my body.
Yes.
Of course, now, now I recognize that. And that's why my trauma recovery groups, I do one on healing the body and one on healing the mind.
Amazing.
I'm going to quote from A.A. Wilson had said, and it was amazing that he said it in 1935, because now we understand with neuroplasticity in the last 35 to 50 years, we understand this statement, but he came up with it in 1935. He said, I'm paraphrasing, we can't sit around and think our way into right action. We need to act our way into right thinking.
That's beautiful. I love it.
And of course, now we understand why, because with neuroplasticity and the brain's capacity to actually rewire itself, that we can, if we replace bad habits with healthy habits, we can quite literally rewire our brains. And, Bob Lipton wrote The Biology of Belief. He found out that by changing our thoughts, we can literally change the structure of our RNA. There's a famous photographer who wrote something along the lines, The Miracle of Water. He photographed water crystals and he showed how they changed in happy homes versus in
Yes,
right?
I love that.
There's all this quote evidence out there. Once you have been down at, really far down the rabbit's hole, if you manage to figure out how to crawl out for yourself, and we each have our own path. I work with patients on helping them as an expert witness and companion to travel that journey. Boy, when we can stand up proudly and see what we've become and what we've made of ourselves and how much we can give and how beautiful and miraculous life is and all that we can do to make the most of it. Every time I suffer grief, I say that best revenge, or the best way of honoring those who've come before us, is to make every day count. And I'll modify that to make every moment count, because being in the present moment is, first of all, the easiest place to be, and the place that's, letting go of the anxiety about the the future, letting go of the rumination about the past that brings us down, and simply being present, like my beautiful lotus flowers that courageously from deep down in the mud grow the beautiful flower, as Thich Nhat Hanh had spoken about in his little tiny book, No Mud, No Lotus. So it's about turning pain into purpose, and that's what the gift is about, the gift, Trauma to Triumph. I hope that people who choose to read the book will find their path. And for those who have been fortunate enough not to have experienced trauma in their lives, to be prepared, which, the Buddha recognized, excuse my French, that shit happens, right? That life has suffering. What's optional is the pain. But I think America, in especially post World War II, we were given the promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I think that that went to our heads a little bit too much. And then comes along something like 9/11, and it shakes us up, and all the unrest. And by the way, as a country, everyone has different ways of measuring success. I guess as a substance use counselor, I turn to the number of deaths by drugs and sadly report that we are the number 2 nation in the world. With all the wealth, we are the number 2 nation, deaths by drug overdose. That speaks volumes, as does the record number of school shootings, with young people having tremendous anger inward that's turned outward and weaponized with all kinds of weapons of destruction. It's sad. So I think that there's no better time than the present moment to look into what's involved in personal growth and development, spiritual growth and development, compassion and self-forgiveness and self-love. And I think those are the main messages of the book.
Beautiful. Let's not forget about the self. And I think that in a gist, after everything, bringing it all together, you met yourself again. You were able to meet yourself at depths, at levels that you weren't able to before. And from there, like you said, the mud, you felt the mud on your feet. And now, not only are you blooming, but you are helping others bloom and heal.
I say in the book that I truly understand now what it means that when you find work that you love, you feel like you've never worked a day in your life.
Yeah.
Because I get paid every 2 weeks. And I have to tell you that when the paycheck comes, I'm like, you mean I'm actually getting paid for this? I love, and it is such a blessing because this has not been my life. Most of us can't say this. And I appreciate the wonderful gift that I have of being able to wake up in the morning and love what I do. Absolutely love it and change lives. And the greatest thrill, Sapna, is that I experience patients seeing my compassion and feeling it.
Yes.
That brings me the connection that I thrive on. One interview I did, they asked me, how do I dealing with other people's trauma? My answer was that I feel so connected, not judgmental, compassionate and connected, that the tragedy doesn't hurt my heart. It provides an opportunity for love and compassion and healing, and that's what makes me thrive. So, I'm both a healer and a practitioner by virtue of my moving from being a survivor to a professional now, and I'm thrilled to have spent this time with you. It means a lot to me when young people who are shaping their future horizons in such a wonderful way, hopefully some of my words can reach you and others who you teach and work with in your professional capacity in the future. And I'm sure you're going to do a beautiful job at it.
Thank you so much, Burton. That means a lot. And once again, you have no idea, just everything that you were saying, recapping the book, going through your personal trajectory of where you were, how you got here from where you were, everything resonates with me, everything. And exactly like you said, I mean, it's your intent behind what you do that we can feel, and we can feel it. And it's, as you said, it's nothing but good. It feels nothing but all the good stuff that I think is needed more in this world. More people like you who have basically lived the different types of experiences, the highs and the lows, literally, so that you can see the appreciation of both. I mean, you honestly, I think we need both. Sometimes we may need to hit the ground to appreciate, but at the end of the day, I mean, just how you got back up and how you transformed and how you keep going and how you've experienced. I mean, literally, you've lived. You have a story. You have so many stories. I look up to that. I look up to one day being this cool grandma who has all these stories under my belt. Because that's what shows shows we've lived and we've loved and we've lost and we've experienced. And I can't wait to, I mean, I love your book. It made me cry. It brought me so many. And then at the end, it reminded me of what the human existence is all about, and how simple it
Thank you.
can be.
Maybe before we leave, just to read the subtitle, because you mentioned Rising Up, a
Yes.
trauma survivor's memoir on lost love, murder, suicide, mental illness, drug addiction, family crisis, elder abuse, and how to rise up when life beats you down.
Yes.
And that's the most important thing. I'll leave you with a wonderful Zulu word, Sa ubona. And Sa ubona means I see you. And I see you in a deep way. And when I see you deeply and you feel seen, that's what brings us into existence. Also, a similar concept of Ubuntu. Beautiful,
Yes.
beautiful words
Yes.
I've discovered to help me. And in my writing of 60,000 words, I had to be creative in finding some that resonated deeply with me. But Sapna, I thank you again. It's been pleasure sharing, not pleasure in the sense of all joyous, very difficult. I haven't really spoken about the tragedy as publicly as you've just asked me to, but I felt that you created a safe space for doing it, and I felt it would be beneficial for people to understand where human beings can come from and go to.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much once again for sharing. Thank you so much for showing up and just for being honest with your experience. And this is going to go a long way. It's going to help so many people. I can't wait to keep paying this book forward because so many people need it. Even if they haven't gone through something, as deep as what we've encountered, they will still be able to take something from this, even for their own spiritual journey, as we all are on some way, shape, or form.
Thank
So
you.
once again, thank you so much for your time, Mr.
Namaste.
Fischler.